Warning: the information given during this podcast is from professionals discussing situations from our experience and sharing knowledge.
We are not treating or diagnosing what you are personally experiencing, and if you are having difficulties, please seek professional help.
Hello and welcome to
It's Not You.
It's Them.
This series is about getting started
All you need to know about finding, working,
and finishing up with a therapist.
and we are back. I'm Rich.
I'm Lauren.
We are back once again, delving more into the shopping experience of getting counsellors. But I think today is an important one, the legal stuff. Legal stuff.
Yes, I think it gets swept over in terms of, okay, I finally found my counsellor. I think I like them. I think we're going to do good work together.
Yeah.
What am I signing myself up for? What does
Correct.
informed consent mean? What does confidentiality mean? Who's going to keep my information? And all that good stuff.
Yes. So, let's start from the top then. Confidentiality. Confidentiality should be explained in the initial consultation, at least covered once, to make it clear what it is and how it's going to be affecting you.
Bare minimum.
So it's normal. It's harm to self, others, or if you know of harm happening to somebody else.
Yes. So what do we do when we feel we need to breach confidentiality? What should be the baseline for a good therapist?
Baseline will be having, when you explain the confidentiality at the beginning of this is what I'm going to do. And I always come from the point of view of this is to keep you safe. Because in any one of them scenarios, you're not safe. So it's about keeping you safe. If it's somebody, a very high risk client, I will sometimes have a safety plan and take away the anxiety of something happening. So for example, if they tend to be quite suicidal, I'll say to them, right, who is the best person to contact when you're feeling like this, what we're going to do, and have a very clear structure at the very beginning so they know if they ever come in and say, I'm feeling suicidal today and I've got means to do it, so which is different to saying, oh, I feel a bit down today, or I feel like I'm not staying alive today, is very different to I'm feeling suicidal and I have means to do it.
Yeah. So we would break confidentiality essentially to keep you and others safe. Yeah. So if you are giving us enough information that warrants that feeling in our gut that you are going to do something to yourself or to others, then we are mandated reporters. So that means that we have to report to the appropriate safety person, authorities, whoever, ambulance service, where we feel that we are going to keep you alive.
Correct. And keep you feeling safe.
Yeah.
And
it's not done lightly. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not something that we would do often. But it is important to understand what that means. Like, if we have to break confidentiality, we would never do so willingly. We would do so sparingly. But it is important to understand what that actually means. Yeah.
And that's part of why even my clients who just have the initial consultation, the most admin they'll ever do is when they start signing up. And that's not even a lot of admin. It's a couple of electronic forms. One of them was be capturing their medical information, so their GP, and within that is also their emergency contact. So that's like the emergency contact should be the person that if you're feeling wobbly, this could be your best friend, doesn't have to be your spouse, doesn't have to be whoever. It's whoever's gonna, if I ever have to be in that position of being breaking confidentiality, I want to make sure the right people are being informed. Yeah. The right people are going to help you through that moment. And that's the reason I capture that information.
And it'll be even more important if you're going to a specific service for domestic violence, for sexual assault, anything like that. Like, make sure that person is somebody that can come and get you in that moment of need. Absolutely. Don't feel it has to be your medical next of kin. It can be anybody that you feel is going to be there for you.
Yeah. And I'm not capturing the medical information to then, once we've had sessions, send notes to that person
Right.
Because like I'm not using it to communicate any sort of thing that goes on a session. What happens in a session stays in a session.
Yeah.
And I even say, like, the only other person I speak to about it is my clinical supervisor, but I don't, there's no identifiable details when I'm speaking to my clinical supervisor about that person. They could not identify who that is from a lineup. Right. It's just to give you like an overall look at what's going around in that case, and is anything that I might have missed or anything worth exploring a bit more, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Yeah. So informed consent.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
So that is making a conscious decision and feel like you've been given enough information to make that decision, and that you're also capable of making that decision.
Accurate. Yes. So informed consent is do you understand? Are you able to give the pros and cons of the service that you are signing yourself up for? Now, if that service, if you're a young person or a young adult, might have been strongly suggested by a parent or guardian, you still have the right to know exactly what the terms of this arrangement are. So in terms of confidentiality, like we just talked about, what about who has my data? Where is it going to go? Where is it going to get stored? What are my rights as a I was going to say inmate then, it's stuck in my head, but like, what are my rights as a person experiencing therapy? Like, can I step out at any time? Like, can I leave and come back? Can I, all those things that kind of the nitty-gritty parts of establishing a functioning, healthy, supported relationship.
Yeah. And it's also important to note that just because the person who's paying the bill for the therapy might be different from the person getting the therapy, doesn't mean that person has access to information. So if you're getting it via you've got employee supported assistance things that you have, like most employers have it now, like either a phone line or a helpline, and you could get sessions from the back of that. Just because your employer is providing that doesn't mean they've got access to that information. It just means they're footing the bill for it. The same if you're a parent providing for the children or the young person, just because they're paying the bill doesn't mean they get the information in them sessions.
Right.
So in the UK, that's what it is. Anyway.
Yeah.
Like we've already talked about in the previous episode about how the privacy, not confidentiality.
Yeah, and I think it also, if you don't understand the written form, then you can say you have a right to say that. You have a right to ask for it in another form, whether that's Braille, speech to text. Bring your additional person with you to help you understand and explain it, and make sure that you fully understand and feel confident and autonomous about the service you are receiving. Now, if some of them might be online, but you can always request the therapist to send it to you via the post, right? Like or to contact them and have them read it to you. Like, don't feel like, well, if you're an older person and you don't have access to a computer, or you can't do it via an app, then there should be, by basic in 2023, there should be alternative forms of communication mechanism, whatever, to help you understand what you have a right to.
Yeah. Because it's important, it's about building that trust and building of like expectations and all that sort of stuff. But there's nothing worse when you're getting into a space where you're just, you're letting your guard down and explore a bit more. You don't want to be hit by a hidden surprise there, which will damage the therapeutic relationship and any work that you're putting in. You know what I mean? You don't want that to be damaged.
And you shouldn't be drowned in like legal jargon. Like, there's a very clear and simple way to explain informed consent, as we just did in the last 2 minutes. Like, you don't need to be signing 48 pages of medical information asking you when surgeries were. And some of the forms over here in the US can go into far too much detail. I think it's all insurance-based. A lot of the insurance companies hold far too much power over here about the information and services that companies can provide. But it should be short and sweet. You can ask for clarification if you need to. And it should cover confidentiality. It should cover the boundaries of therapy, what times you can or cannot contact your therapist, right? Like some of these new services like Cerebral or BetterHelp or some of the others, you can access your therapist 24/7. Now, as a clinician, that horrifies me, to be honest. You don't want to receive me when I've got road rage on one of these roads and you're messaging me about a crisis you're having, you're not going to get the best version of me in that moment. No. So for me, boundaries are super important to provide the best level of service I can. So be clear about when, how. Is it by email? Is it via text? Do we have a work phone? Do you understand the work phone is going to be off after 5 p.m.? So do you need to contact emergency services? Like, all of these things should have been very clearly explained to you, and the information that you have signed, you need to understand that's also a legally binding document. It's not just some forms that you're signing willy-nilly. They're there to protect you as a client, but also to protect us as clinicians, that if you do start contacting us at 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night, you're violating the terms of that contract, which means we can also terminate the therapy if we need to.
Yeah.
So I think
it's boundaries, isn't it?
It is. And if you're in therapy and you're struggling with something, boundaries are something that you may or may not have good boundaries in. Yeah. So it's so important when you're in this vulnerable space to be clear. Because transference happens when you kind of think your therapist is something else, or you're like, this person's amazing, they're the only person that gets me, lines get blurred. And that's why it's also good practice to revisit that informed consent. If you've been seeing somebody for a while, every couple of months, and even if your therapist doesn't visit it, you need to look back in on it. Yeah,
absolutely, for sure, because you want to make sure you're in the right place. I think stepping onto, like, so you've got the consent in place, you understand what they're collecting the data for, codes of conduct. You sort of touched on that a little bit a couple episodes ago about, like, the codes of conduct, like the different regulation, regulators. Now in the UK, it's self-regulated industry, so that means there's no, like, law for this to happen, but they have a good high standard of practice, and they get people to, you know, in order for you to get the liability insurance, you need to be a member of one of these professional bodies. So they got the BACP and that sort of thing over here.
In the US, it's every modality has their own set of code of ethics. So, for example, as a licensed professional counsellor, that's who I am, I follow the code of ethics of the American Counselling Association. That's if I break that or I have a claim against me, I have to declare that claim every single time I apply for insurance, and it could affect the fact that I could be covered or not. Social workers have the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethics. The psychiatry people have the American Psychological Association. So, like, but every person that has a license in the US has to abide by a code of ethics. Now, that also means there's a complaints procedure, and I know there is for the BACP as well in the UK. And what's the other one in the UK? Like a National Counsellors Association or something. Like, there's two of them, isn't there?
National Counsellors, and you've also got, like, the psychology law, something, I don't know.
And that's also, again, to protect both client and therapist. So, like, we are also protected in that we don't have to put up with abuse or disrespect, or clients that are consistently late, or people that don't pay and stuff like that. Like, it protects us as clinicians because what we do is important. But it also protects the vulnerable people we work with in terms of if a counsellor keeps cancelling your sessions for no reason, and or you paid for a couple of sessions and you're only getting 35 minutes instead of an hour that you thought you were getting, stuff like that. And also the clarity that if your counsellor has ever had a case claimed, especially in the US, you can find that information out. Which is but pros and cons, right? People get frustrated, things go down, whatever. But codes of ethics, the primary point of code of ethics is do no harm. Like, whatever you subscribe to as a clinician, whether that's psychology, psychiatry, counsel worker, social therapist, the primary element is do no harm.
Do no harm. Correct. 100% correct. I'd agree with that. I think the other bit so we've got a thing about how we behave, but the other part that we also respond to is the data. So we tell you the reasons why we collect the data, but How is data regulated over in the US?
So it is HIPAA, HIPPA. I don't know what it stands for. No one actually uses it. It's just HIPAA. That is a medical violation of information. So therapy in the US counts as medical information. You are a medical provider. So I'd have to get a release of information signed by a client for me to share information with another service. So, for example, if I was working with somebody and I needed to contact Adult Protective Services, I would have to get their permission to share their information. I'd have to let them know what I was sharing and why.
Yeah.
And they have to sign that information, and I have to upload it to the system before that can happen. Now, if I share information that they didn't agree to share and that comes to light, that is a HIPAA violation, and that is punishable by law. Again, Americans, everything is litigious, right? Like it's all about insurance companies. It's all about privacy and confidentiality and who is holding that information. Now, luckily, I don't work as a private practitioner right now, so I don't have to kind of really delve into that. The information we work with is state governed, etc. But how is that for you in the UK as a private practitioner?
As a private one, we have to have an ICO registration to handle the data, and then we're governed by, in the UK, is GDPR, which is that's overtook what we used to have as like data protection. So this is like a beefed up version of it. So it's about where the information is stored. So there's like one part of it is around the responsibility of the person who's storing the information, and then the person who's accessing the information, and what is it being held for. And you have to have a reason for holding certain bits of data now. So you can't. It has to be appropriate for the job you're doing. You couldn't just start asking somebody some really random question that's got nothing to do with the service that they're coming to get. It has to be very specific. You can't just get anything, which I think, I'm surprised it wasn't there before. But over here, you like over here, it's very much like you have to be very careful. So I know that for me, where you store your client notes, some people do the old-fashioned thing of like pen and paper, and then you have to have a filing cabinet or something that's lockable. Or if you're using client notes, you have to have codes, and their name and address be kept separate, held separately, that sort of thing. Whereas if you're online, sometimes people have it like all the information shared in the cloud, so it's not in as some sort of accessible, and then you'd have all the legal protections on top of that, and the security that goes with that. And is it up to scratch? Because there's certain providers that don't have the level of security that's required to hold that data because of how sensitive it is, which also then leads into what information do you record after a session, which I think is important.
It is. And having practiced in the UK as both working with a charity and some private practice as well, it is such a different world than it is over here in terms of anything you have written that is pertaining to a client can be subpoenaed in a court of law, right? That's not as easy in the UK in terms of they have to specifically request certain information in the UK. I remember that from before.
Yeah.
But in the US, if it has the person's name in it, identifying number, their date of birth, anything the courts can subpoena, even if it's client notes. So even in the company I work for now, thankfully, everything is already dealt with on an online system that's encrypted and everything else. But it is really, even if we sent the information via email, our emails could be subpoenaed. So, and that's really important to know, that give you a sense of confidence that your information is protected. It is handled with care, and it is handled with the utmost respect, right? Our client notes are only ever to remind us of what's happened in the session, so we can keep track of you, okay, so we talked about that. Yeah. This is what I think's going on. This is what I think might be a good track for next time. Yeah. It's only ever as reminders. We're not, when it's Dear Diary, you know what I mean?
It is really not Dear Diary. To me, we've always trained, and I think that as well, people might go, oh, well, how do you therapists? During your training, it's drummed in how you keep your information, what the processes are. When you get placements, they explained how they do it. So, you get an idea of what to, before you become a private practitioner, or like part of a company, you've got an expectation of what you should be doing. So that that's embedded really. For me, that I always put down factual things. You don't put your opinion because it can be subpoenaed. It doesn't happen that often in the UK that I'm aware of. Certain charities that do get information done when it relates to a specific case or when something goes radically wrong, you know. So I imagine that would be then subpoenaed. But you also up to how long you want to hold the information for. Like I think for me, when a client no longer is in my care after X amount of time, I then will delete their records.
Yeah.
Because it's not, to me, it's
well, why do you need it if you're not seeing them?
Why do I need it? Yeah. If the last communication was X amount of time ago, they left on a kind of good thing. If there's no harm in them later down the line re-registering with me to then book new stuff, that's fine. But I just don't want to hang on to the old stuff if I don't need it. Yeah,
and I think that, I mean, with the clientele I work with at the moment, like we have historical records going back however long they've been with us.
Yeah.
And that is for legal reasons. Right. And it could be helpful, but it could also hinder the practice sometimes as well in terms of, okay, well, they had this diagnosis in 2006. Yeah, well, it's now 2023. Like, things have changed. People move, people change.
Right.
But in private practice, there should be no reason why they still have your records longer than 5 years, if that. Some people have 5-year minimum. Some people have 7, depending on the level of need and the type of service they provide. But they should have it no more. So if you left and came back 10 years later, they shouldn't know who you are. Period. They should know who you are. Yeah. You can also request your records. Fun fact.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
I remember doing that once as a client, and I was doing my dissertation, and I was going to ask my therapist for my notes, and I wasn't clear enough, and she pulled all 10 years of my records, which were like. Like this. Yeah. She was really concerned. She's like, you know, I want to give you these are yours. And I'm like, oh God, I don't want to know what you actually think of me. Like, I just wanted the drawings and the diagrams that we'd done together. Like, I don't actually want to know.
That stuff. I don't want to know that bit. I don't. No, thank you. That's.
But you can, but it also be mindful in why you're requesting it. Right? Like, it does affect the relationship. Yeah.
Because, like, they've written it down for a particular reason. It doesn't, like, you'll be putting
additional strain on the relationship, I think. Yeah.
This was strain, and you'd also be filling in the blanks, right? We talked about that before. Like, the brain loves to fill in the blanks. You'd be like, oh, why have they written that for? For me, it might be because I have you just want that connecting bit of information because you might forget that bit of information, or like, do you know what I mean? Like, the reason for putting it down.
Client felt a little bit more hostile than they have done in previous sessions, like just as a reminder that they were a bit off that day, or like something was off for you, and then they read it five years later. What do you mean I was hostile? Was that
right? Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So there's that, and I think circling back to the GDPR bit, like there is severe like financial penalties over here for breaches around that sort of stuff. It's
as there should be.
As there should be. I mean, like. You know, you don't want to find that. The way it was always explained to me when I used for a young person's charity was the supervisor said, if that bit of paper was found on the floor for whatever unfortunate reason it is, if somebody read this, could they identify who it was about? And I thought that has always stuck with me because God forbid something happens, how am I making sure that person is not identified? That's not about that person.
Yeah.
That stuck with me. I think there's also something about circling back to legal capacity of someone to start in a service.
Okay. What do you mean,
in terms of like
clinician?
I think as a client, what's their legal capacity? Because for young people, there's definitely a thing about being phrased as competent. About do they have enough understanding, enough functioning cognitive bit that they understand what's going on? Do they understand what's happening? To agree to, I think you just go back to the informed consent at the end of the day. There's another aspect to it. As long as they can comprehend what it is they're agreeing to and saying yes to.
And I think that's important to bring up in terms of people that have additional needs, right? Like if that's learning difficulties, significant mental health issues. They might be schizophrenic or have active psychosis. They may have had like a learning plan in school, which means they have to have stuff read to them. Like all of these things that if you needed help with forms ever in your life, whether that's through the citizen's advice or like your dad reads them to you, you know, something like that. Like we need to make sure, not only as clinicians, but also you as a client need to make sure you understand. And right. We're using the word understand because it comes with a level of like cognitive capacity. Like if I tell the therapist this, I know this might happen, right?
Correct.
If I tell them I've been hurting myself, and we're going to use the suicidal ideation style plan because it's the most common, right?
Yeah.
If I tell my therapist I've been cutting myself in my bathroom with my mum's razor, and she doesn't know anything about it, do I understand now, having given him that information, something is going to happen as a result to keep me safe? Correct. Now, and it could be hard. People with Down syndrome, for example, or people with dyspraxia or dyslexia, everybody has a right to therapeutic services.
Absolutely.
And you shouldn't ever feel, I think I like the term you use, othered, because you can't read the information or you can't download it from some charities, for example. If you're going on the quiet to a domestic violence charity, you might be referred by the police. We don't do anything on computer or phone because it can be locked or cloned, right? Everything should be done in person, via paper. Nothing should be recorded. Nothing should be held. So there are times when your life could be at stake. That capacity is important. So make sure you have access to the information in whatever form you feel you need it. And if the therapist is being difficult about it, you might need to try someone else.
Correct, because the job is not to make you feel, it's to make you feel comfortable, so we understand how hard the work is that you're coming to do, like, and how difficult it can be. We've got an idea of like, because we've been through some of it ourselves, and also like we've watched clients go through this journey, so we understand about this journey that you're about to take on. We understand the difficulties, so we don't want to make coming into it harder or make you feel ashamed or embarrassed, because I understand like there's people who are not illiterate and they're older, they're adults, they've got families, they've got kids. Like, I understand that, you know, they have navigated through life best they can, or managed to get through, like, not best they can, like they've got through, even though they can't do this one bit or this is a slow bit, and that will not be a barrier to it. Because I was even thinking there in my head, like, what could I even suggest if they couldn't could you verbally get them to consent to it, or even say to, like, do you have a trusted person that could read that? We could go through that together, and then you could consent. So then you feel confident what I'm telling you is correct. You know, like
even like visually impaired people, you know, speech to text, stuff like that. Like, you can get companies that will download and create documents in Braille for them. Like, there's so many accessible options that there should be no barrier to therapeutic services. And if you feel like there is, or you feel like you're annoying your counselor or therapist in some way, I would say there's already a barrier there and to go somewhere else.
Yeah. Right. It's about being accepted, isn't it? And you don't want that to not be the thing. So
no, it's not just functioning middle-aged people that access therapy, right? Like, you can be illiterate. You can be, you know, not able to read something, or you graduated out of school in 8th grade and you didn't have any high school. Like, some of the stuff I have to redirect or break down the information and make it make sense to them. It's not hard, right? I don't take that on as oh my God, like, why don't they get this? This is okay, the information's not making sense to them, so how can I make it make sense, right? It's not, you shouldn't ever feel like your therapist is annoyed by that request. Do you know what I mean? Like, I applaud them for having the courage to tell me that they were struggling with that. Could I you know what, Ms. Latham, I didn't quite get that last bit. Could you put it in another way? Of course, I'd love to. I'd love to. Let me figure it out for a second. So, no, don't ever feel you're already overwhelmed. You're already at your limit. You're already aware that there's a problem or you're struggling. So, if you're getting 48 pages worth of forms and you're overwhelmed by that, just bring them with you. Bring them with you to the next session. Hand them back to the therapist and say, I'm so sorry, like, I couldn't do this at that moment, which is absolutely fine. and go with them in the session. There should be no reason why no good therapist isn't able to do that for you.
I agree.
No matter what service.
That's true. I think
charity.
That's a good way to...
No, but like sometimes the charities, you know, like they want to get people in and seen, and sometimes it could be a bit of a rush, or like insurance companies won't approve something if the person hasn't filled out this one form. So please don't allow the concern of like, well, I don't get it, or like I didn't know what that word meant, or ask if you are worried about your data. You know, you've been involved in a data breach before, and you've had to deal with that. Like, you're allowed to ask more questions.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
But yes, but accommodations should be made, and any good therapist should make them for you. So yes,
I agree.
Yeah.
All right. Amazing stuff. Well, we'll put some information. If you've got any questions about any of this, please do click on the link. Leave us a voicemail. But if you want to, email us in. It's not you.podcast1@gmail.com. We'd love to hear some of your stuff. We've already had a few things come in already. But yeah, I look forward to seeing you next time. And we'll break it down so you have an even better shopping experience for counsellors.
Yes, absolutely. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.